Here we go. Shalom and good evening, good morning, good afternoon. We are global. We are live like other things in the world. We are live tonight at TMS Roundtable. My name is Dr. Tova Goldfein, and I am here with my lovely co-host and partner for life, L'chaim. Hi, Rose.
Good morning, Tova. Oh, good evening, pardon me. It's evening in Europe and the Middle East, isn't it?
Yeah.
You know, folks, this is really probably our anniversary program.
Yeah.
And we've got Michael joining us again. So thank you, Michael, for joining us. To think it's been 12 months since we started this process, just because of COVID. So although COVID's pretty bad, we got together in this format. Now, tonight or today, wherever you are, Tova has come up with the idea of talking about placebo and nocebo, and she has enlisted Michael to do this discussion.
Yeah.
Now, if you think about it, a placebo is merely a word that says to please. It's a Latin derivative word, and it says to please. Now, the medical fraternity has, I think, hijacked it in actual fact. And as we were talking before the program, we came to the conclusion that to heal, a person needs intention, a bit of insight, and a belief in their power to heal as well. And, you know, I think that goes for every sort of illness, disease, relationship, self-esteem, and all the other things, rearing children. Those three insights would be our life force. Thank you, Michael, for joining us. And here we go. Michael, being the author and the producer of All the Rage, Saved by Sano, can actually help us on the road because he's had an overview of patients, himself, and the doctors who treat people. So thank you, Michael.
You're welcome. It's always good to be here. You guys always have a lot of great insights.
You're always here for us in the ninth inning. I really always here for us in the ninth and the first inning.
Well, I don't mind being called in from the bullpen, I guess is all.
And Dave Clarke's trying to get in. So before he comes in to give us his opinion, let's talk about this.
Well, what's the question? Well, before we start, we were just talking about just the power of, you know, placebo versus nocebo. And actually, I think that's one thing that's interesting. If you think of them, if you just think of placebo, right, then what you don't recognize is how powerful placebo plus awareness of nocebo is. So if you're at this midline where there's nothing, right, where if there's lack of belief, there's often a sense that the drug or the pill won't work as well. It might not even have an impact. Whereas, right, so it decreases it. So if you have lack of belief, even if you get a healing agent that is proven over time to have power, like an aspirin, we know will often help a headache, right? But an aspirin will also help a headache in some way because when we take the aspirin, our body says, okay, relief is here, it's coming. And so our body knows to respond to that. But if you don't believe that the aspirin will work, it may work with less power. So if you're not including nocebo and placebo together, you're not getting the full weight of the impact of belief versus non-belief or faith and lack of faith. And so I just think there's this really interesting mashup between science and spirituality and emotion. And so when we talk about, we use the word belief, we're thinking of that in a non-spiritual sense. But when we're talking about faith, that's a kind of a greater belief, a belief beyond just, I believe when I open my eyes, I'm going to see my mom, right? Like when you're playing peekaboo. That's belief. But it's also faith because you, at that age, you don't have a differentiation. You have faith that your parents.
That's all you've got.
It's all you've got. Then one day you open your eyes and they're not there. And your faith is shaken to the core. Maybe you're never okay after that because now your sense of faith is gone. You may believe things will happen, but it may damage your faith, which also ties into this whole cancerous mess, the idea of trauma and how much that affects even our ability to heal, our ability to have a placebo response, or our tendency to have a nocebo response, right? So in other words, that we feel unhealable. I just think all these things are really interesting and deeply connected. And they're not separate. And then we oftentimes try to separate them. We try to separate the mind and the body, but they're just, it's a ludicrous task, you know?
And it's an art. It's an
why does medicine think it's okay? When medicine is our premium way
because medicine, all the way back to Descartes, I think, decided science is different than
religion or art. Oh, Michael, come back.
There became a greater level of hubris that we can figure this out. We can go deeper. We can go to the smallest nanopart and we'll get the absolute understanding. And we're going to separate everything apart without understanding the incredible intricacy of how our emotions are the operating system, right?
We
think, okay, I'm going to come in and I'm going to reboot the system by replacing your heart with somebody else's heart. So now you're going to be better because your heart, this massive tissue, but that massive tissue still actually carries a lot of learned behaviors from somebody else. You know, you're going to be a different person after that. That doesn't mean all of a sudden you're going to wake up liking different foods, but like it takes a while to get everything to mesh, right?
So now we're talking about neuro pathways,
right? And but also belief. Like, what happens when you get the heart? Do you know? It's like, I know I'm going all over the place, and we're talking about nocebo and placebo, but my real point is, you actually cannot separate that discussion back to what you were just saying, Rose, about science. So where did it go? Well, we took this incredibly intense, capitalistic, biotechnical approach to medicine, saying that we're going to figure out both the drugs and the medical procedures, and we're going to solve all medical problems. But the way we did it is by controlling, in some sense, whenever we did these trials, for emotional response. And in other words, not even controlling, just pretending that it has no impact. And so we don't include that data in the efficacy of drugs. When you start you start to see that that's actually way more complex. You know?
Yeah.
Go ahead.
That's the point. That with RTCs, with randomized controlled trials, there's no notion of how the patient perceives being in the trial. And you know, why on earth does the drug companies can get an okay from the Federal Drug Agency for 50% of the patients to get better? So why didn't the other 50 get better if this drug was so wonderful?
And it's not just better, it's better at some,
wonderful.
It's better at some predetermined, like 2 or 3% improvement. Some very minuscule thing will be like, okay, we'll invest millions and billions of dollars in this, but we won't invest, $100,000 in a pre-K mindfulness program, which may negate, billions of dollars of healthcare costs down the line, right? Like if we can create emotional intelligence, we can decrease so many different healthcare costs. Or if we perhaps do something like, which seems very expensive, like some kind of basic income, which decreases stress exponentially. And with that, we have just a huge drop in healthcare costs. So we don't weigh these things out properly. We don't think them through.
Let's not have a discussion about that doctor in your movie was walking down the hall. It was the skin doctor saying, this is not a moneymaker. Or was it Howard Stern that said that? This is not the way to make money. So let's not have a discussion about that.
Well, right. So, but it's the way to save money. That's the problem. It saves a lot of money to spend certain types of money. But it's, I mean, recently someone left a review of it, All the Rage on Amazon. They're like, this is really important information, but I could have done without the political discussion, because there's 14 seconds about the connection between the rise in the wealth gap and the rise in chronic pain that they track together. And that's not scientific data, but it also goes back to the other data in the post I wrote called if stress is the problem and we ignore it, it's a problem. But like, if you look at the data on lupus, right? African-American women get 4 times more than white women. Latinx women get it 3 times more, and Asian American women get it twice as much as women. And women get it twice as much as men. So you've got a factor of 8 in terms of black women versus white men. So it's perceived, lupus is perceived as something that black women get, right? But if you look at that, right, you do a chart and you put men, women, and then other, those races. What you're looking at is a chart of relative privilege. So we're not talking about a genetic problem. We're talking about a deeply embedded cultural problem in which each of those levels demands an increasing level of emotional repression in order to avoid conflict, because you're at these different levels of, I mean, it's right there. That's the proof. You don't need any more proof than that. Like, how else could you not notice that correlation? You could dismiss it, but to do so is just totally foolhardy.
Wow.
I mean, that's data, right? It's a huge data set, and it tells us something. And it doesn't tell us genetic issues. It tells you based on race, which is also kind of wishy-washy because there's all kinds of mixtures of race in there. Like, it's even more clear that it's not a genetic thing.
Yeah. Well, that's the hard part about it, isn't it? But I in our original discussion about placebo, we actually saw an article, and this is how it came up. And I suggested that placebo, which is to please, is really about the milk of human kindness. And I was recounting to Tova how on night duty, you find a patient who was awake and anxious. And just by stopping for those couple of minutes with your torch and saying to the patient, I'll get you something to help you sleep. How do you like your cup of tea? And when I brought back the cup of tea, I think that it's the cup of tea that cured their insomnia, because they knew they weren't alone. And to me, placebo is more about having confidence that the person who's going to help you, be it the doctor or whatever, is if they've got that persona, the person will get better. They'll believe that they'll get better. Maybe they need more insight, but there's something going on that's so profound and so neglected. Mm-hmm. And, even when you think about an appointment, you've got to wait in the waiting room because the doctor's made an appointment for you that doesn't correlate with your watch. Right. It doesn't correlate with your busyness in your own life. And you've got to sit there silently and wait until the doctor's ready for you. Whereas the doctor could have actually put your appointment at the correct time, and so that your value as a human being would be considered first. Right. So
or finding some way to find an equal measure, or even you bring up something that maybe there's more staff to sit with you or to do intake, or just to even ask questions that make you feel like there's a purpose in being there. And not even, but also to have more of a purpose. I mean, going back to that randomized control trial issue, it's not that I always kind of mess up and say they control for it. In fact, is they just ignore it. They pretend that it's not a factor because it's too complex a factor. But there's no reason these questions every single trial couldn't include the questions of the ACE study, so that data becomes part of every study. And then we're able to track how that affects everything, right? In terms of healing, in terms of belief. And then if we track, okay, what if we do this, every study should also involve those questions, but also a subset that is targeted for treatment based on those questions as well. So whatever the drug is or the other treatment, plus some trauma addressment, right? Some maybe 2 sessions with a therapist, maybe even a single session with a therapist or a trauma awareness counselor, right? If you add that in, what's going to happen?
Yeah.
Well, we know what's going to happen. There's going to be greater rates of success.
Yeah. Well, in Halifax with Dr. Alan Abbas, he, in his ED clinic in the hospital there, I think it's QE2 hospital, they have, for chronic pain patients, they have an interview with a psychologist or whoever, a medical practitioner, who has got a background in emotions, and those patients have shown not to be repeat patients anymore. Wow. But he hasn't been able to get the Canadian government to take that on board, as Michael hasn't been able to get the filmmakers to take all the rage on board.
Yeah, and excuse me. I didn't mean to interrupt, Rose.
Go ahead.
Okay, so I was just going to say, because Michael, I just saw a thing from Michael. I don't know if you saw it, Rose. I wanted to send it to you. And someone said, you need to be putting your movie on for free now. And I was going to be like, chutzpah.
Right. Well,
you need to be putting your movie is peanuts. And we need to pay for this incredible piece of information that every time we watch it, it's more and more valuable. So please do not give it away for free. It's already peanuts. Go ahead, Rose. I'm very sorry. I just wanted to support Michael. Somebody said to him he had to be giving it for free now. It's time to give the movie for free.
Well, I mean, that is so clearly about that person as well. That person doesn't value themselves enough to feel like I'm going to spend a little bit of money because I believe that this might help. And so it's a conundrum. I mean, part of it is, it did take 10 years to make, and it takes a lot of work to try to push it into the world. So we do live in capitalism, and we need to figure out ways of doing that in a balanced way.
Well, Michael needs to eat.
Yeah.
You need to eat one day, don't you? Occasionally, from time to time.
Well, I'm okay myself. I'm doing all right, but there is this idea of how do we value our work, right?
Yeah.
And so if we give away our work for free, it's also about the system with none of this is separate anyway from the cultural influences that we have, the cultural expectations we have, the cultural expectations that are placed on us. And I also understand that idea that there's a sense of I don't have enough. I can't spend anything on anything. And that will sometimes keep us stuck as well. We don't want to spend everything we're talking about is going back to the idea of balance, right? Going to placebo, as we were talking a moment ago, and these, don't worry, these are connected. But this idea that, we don't want to believe without faith. So for instance, you may think, I believe I'm going to get better, but it's without insight and thinking about okay, so what am I bringing to this? What emotional thing am I doing? What am I holding that may be related to this? So if you're just I believe in God, I believe in faith, I think something's going to cure me, without being present enough to think about what else you're also carrying with you, then that's going to be out of balance too. So everything is about balance. So we don't want to give it away for free, specifically because I actually believe that if people don't invest a little bit of belief or faith in it, then it won't have as much impact. I believe that really firmly. If you don't have to put in a little bit, you're not going to get anything out or as much out, right? You have to invest of yourself, of your time. And if you're getting something for free, you're this is meaningless. I'll just click around,
right.
So that's part of it as well. But that person clearly also has some issues with feeling worthy of spending anything on themselves.
Right.
And I'm not going to fight with them.
Right.
It is free on the library app, Canopy, but you have to have a library that uses Canopy or a university that does. And,
it's really nice.
And we get paid for that. So there's a balance.
Okay, good. That's really nice.
Can you bring up Dave Clarke?
Yes. So Dave had trouble getting in because I think he's probably got a Mac and he went on Safari, though. He came in before. So Dave's here.
He's here. Hi, Dave.
we want a round table with you, Dave. What I'd like to put out, and I have Dave and Rose and Michael comment on, is that the power of the unconscious, which we know is where the childhood trauma lives, where the stress lives, where the memories live. And that's where a lot of our pain comes from. But up here, it's I'm going to get better and I'm going to get better. And I know I can get better and I can please people and I can get better. And the doctor says I can get better, but I don't, because there's a disconnect between the.
Right.
So can you three of you with Dave comment on that?
Can't you get Dave up?
I'd love to get Dave up, but he's having trouble getting in. So we have room in the studio for you, Dave. If you want to keep trying, you have to come in through Chrome. And he said he had trouble doing that. And you have to be near your router, which I'm sure you are. And you were in before because you came in. You're with us in I think November. So Dave, do you want to work out this issue with me?
It'd be better, Dave, to have you actually talking.
Yeah,
rather than responding.
Great to have you talking, Dave. You want to try again? We have all night. Using Chrome.
Oh, he's using Chrome. Good.
Then what happened? And then what happened? How come you didn't get in? Let's put out this. First of all, let's pray. We can all pray and help Dave get in.
Have
That
faith
worked.
in Chrome.
That worked. What else happened, Dave? With why you couldn't get in? Tell us here. So, because Michael also, besides his therapy and besides his great knowledge and information, besides him living with 3 women in his house, 2 daughters and a wife and a couple of cats, he also knows a lot about the internet.
Oh, I don't know anything about the internet.
Oh my God, you know everything.
I mean, I can't. I mean, you're not seeing him. He's not. He's clicking in, but
he's having trouble hooking in, coming in on the link. Do you have his WhatsApp number?
Maybe you can cut and paste the link from the DR in Chrome.
Oh my God, here he is.
Okay,
you were kidding with us. You were fooling us. You were fooling us.
Welcome.
Can you hear me okay?
Yes.
Okay. Sorry.
I just prayed and it worked. This is placebo.
It wasn't taking my passwords, the old story.
Dave, it was prayer and amuna in English, in Hebrew, and it was definitely a desire, the biology of belief. Could you comment on that? Earth to Dave. Can you hear me, Dave? Come in, Dave. Okay, what do you think? We were just praying. I said the word "let's pray," and you came on.
It's Passover after all. I mean, there's a little magic happening.
A bit of magic in the air.
I mean, how did Moses split that sea? Was it a big wind or what? What do you think?
I'm getting
an echo.
Yeah,
there is an echo.
Okay, so
I think, Dave, you probably have another window open from trying. Like, close your Safari.
Okay, hold on.
Just yeah.
There, that's better. Can you hear me?
Yeah.
You're great.
Okay.
The echo's gone.
Okay, so tell us a few of the miracles you've seen that maybe you sort of questioned and thought it was some kind of spontaneous remission and you weren't really sure, Dave, what was going on with this person.
Well, almost all of my patients, when they start out, I'm, concerned that I'm not going to know what's going on with them and that I'm not going to be able to figure it out. I mean, there are countless patients where when they first told me their story, I'm going, there is no way in the world I'm going to be able to figure this out. But when people are physically ill because of psychosocial stresses, those issues are not that far below the surface. And one of the problems is the patients don't recognize what those issues are, so they can't put them into words. If they could put them into words, then they probably wouldn't have the physical symptoms, because those emotions and those traumas and those stresses are manifesting physically because the person cannot recognize them and put them into words. So that's one of the challenges, is when you first listen to a person describe their illness, they're not giving you all that much about what's really causing the problem. And so you just hear the story about their symptoms and you're going, oh my gosh, how am I ever going to figure this out? But people, because the underlying issues are close to the surface, they start giving you clues after a while. I describe the process to my students as though the patient is giving you jigsaw puzzle pieces, and the pieces are going to make a picture, or at least part of a picture. You don't know what the picture is when they first start giving you the pieces. And they may give you a piece in the first 5 minutes that fits with a piece that they give you 35 minutes later. But they gradually, start to come together. And the more of these stories you've heard over the course of your career, the more capable you are at pulling them together and seeing how they fit. But there was one gentleman that I really thought, after the first 5 minutes that I should just leave the room because it was hopeless. And he had itching all over his body for 3 years. And he'd been to neurology. He'd been to skin doctors. He'd been to lots of primary care doctors, and they sent him to me for the marginal reason that some people with liver disease, and I was also a liver specialist, some people with liver disease can get itching of their skin. He didn't have any indication of liver disease at all, but they said, well, it's itching. We can't find anything else. Maybe it's his liver. Send him to Dave. And I'm listening to this. I'm going, oh, itching. They're sending me a patient with itching of his skin whose liver is perfectly fine. This is hopeless. But the story, started to come out, and I was asking him about stress in his life, and he'd grown up in a terrible emotional environment where he was made to feel like a second-rate human being, as so many of my patients are. And then he met his wife, who was just a ray of sunshine in his life, and they had this wonderful relationship for decades that they'd been married. He was an older man at this point. And then she almost died. And he was just beside himself as she developed cancer. And one of the manifestations, it was a white blood cell cancer where the white blood cells infiltrated her skin. Mm-hmm. And she developed itching. And I'm going, okay, we got a connection here. She's the one with the itching back, 3 years ago when she developed this cancer. But we've got the connection. There is something going on here. And to make a long story short, he was...
No, don't make it long.
He was very religious, and when it looked like she was really going to die, and the light of his life, who had rescued him from his emotionally abusive environment, he was going to lose her. He got down on his knees and he prayed and he said, Lord, if you save my wife, I will take her itching.
Oh my God.
And sure enough, a new chemotherapy came about. Was developed, and when she received this new form of chemotherapy that hadn't been available before, she was cured, and he got the itching. And the itching to him
I just got itching.
Yes, I mean, it's powerful. I mean, I couldn't believe this. And the itching to him was his reassurance that the Lord was looking after his wife.
And so he let go of that.
Yes.
And
so what happened?
Once he made the connection, and he said, I still remember his words. He looked at me and he said, Doc, I think you might have hit the nail on the head. And his itching went away 95%. He held on to 5%, just as that little word from from God, that God was taking care of his wife, and that he had taken this on himself. And just amazing case. But that's it. It was a real lesson that the jigsaw puzzle pieces are there. You just keep talking to people about stress in their lives and what's been emotional for them, and
so you're talking
things come out.
The nocebo. More or less, this was not even placebo, nocebo. This was simply the power of the word, or the power of belief.
Power of belief, yeah, which is absolutely, it's on the spectrum of placebo, nocebo. In his case, it was a nocebo because it was uncomfortable for him to have this itching, but at the same time, there was a positive benefit mentally in the reassurance that his wife was going to be okay, that God was looking after her. Right. So there were elements of both.
It's interesting.
Well, it's a placebo because it's to please God.
Yes.
Yeah. So it's a placebo.
Yeah.
And how about the connection with the doctor? I mean, the doctor's word can go either way.
I mean, God.
Yeah, it's like the doctor says, nothing I can do, and people go home and die. Or the doctor says, I might not be able to help you, but I think this guy, Dave Clarke, down the hallway can, and the person has hope. So you got to think about the power that the doctors have. It's a big responsibility.
Yeah, no, you're absolutely right. There's research on this. There's a drug that's used to shrink the male prostate gland when it's too big, and it carries a small risk of erectile dysfunction. And there was a study where they gave this drug to men who needed it, and they told half of them that it might cause erectile dysfunction, and they didn't tell the other half. that it might cause erectile dysfunction. And the proportion of the groups, there was a factor of 3 difference in how many got erectile dysfunction. From 45% in the men who were told that it might do that to 15% in the men who were not told it was going to do that.
Yeah.
So there's a huge difference.
Well, one thing that comes up a lot is coming up a lot of what you're talking about is related to the presence process, which is you guys are going through right now. And someone mentioned the other day this idea that when you're doing the presence process, this meditation, it's bringing stuff up within you that other people are going to reflect back to you. And that's how you're going to learn what's going on in yourself. Because it's these conflicts come up because you're actually drawing it out of other people, because it's your presence coming up to bring you awareness. And what it makes me think is this idea of, like, even as you were talking about what your job is, even healing this guy, it's like the puzzle gets completed, not because you place all of the pieces, but because he starts laying the pieces on the table and you put in a couple. And after a certain point, he's starting to put them in with you. And then you're completing this puzzle together. So what I'm really talking about, this idea is it becomes, in fact, a greater skill once you've figured out where the puzzle's going. It's almost like you're doing a puzzle with your child, right? You now can see all the 50 pieces that need to go. And there's a part of you that has to hold back and facilitate so that person can start to understand how to put the pieces together, because you're not trying to solve the problem for them in that moment. You're trying to teach them how to solve the problem for the rest of their lives, right? So, yeah.
Yeah, and the advantage that I can bring beyond, the presence process sounds like somebody's trying to do this for themselves and with the support of those who know them. And, that if you don't have someone who's, outside of the family or yourself to do this, like a therapist, that's, a great idea. But in my case, I was able, after a number of years of doing this, I was able to bring the information I'd learned from interviewing thousands of people to the story, to an individual, and so I would know what kinds of pieces might be out there, and that was certainly a benefit to the patient.
But it's also really interesting in relation to Michael Brown's idea of the presence process, that he doesn't want it to become a system, which is, I think, a really good idea. And he doesn't think there's a good idea to have trained facilitators. At the same time, some sort of facilitation seems quite useful, guidance on that journey. Just like, you don't want to, as they're increasing this, especially in Oregon, there's now psychedelic mushroom treatment, and it's being approved with facilitation. And without facilitation, it can be more complex and probably not as useful. So it's like, how do we figure out how to do that in all kind of aspects of our culture? Teaching, like when we tell people information, they don't learn it. When we challenge people to figure out information, they learn it. And it's the same thing emotionally as well. And it goes back to storytelling. Sometimes it's difficult. One time we put a line in a movie where someone basically stated a thesis. They said, the developer is trying to divide this community because if they divide the community, they can take advantage of us, right? But it kind of robbed that. It was too early in the movie, and it robbed that kind of realization from the audience. So we took it out. And then there's this kind of homeopathy aspect where we oftentimes will put a line in a movie and take it out, and it's still, part of it's still there somehow. Maybe it shaped the way we edited around it, but it becomes too obvious, so we have to pull it out. And that's something that really happened with All the Rage. We had to take out so much of the information because we were robbing the emotional experience from people. Instead, we're telling them something rather than having them experience it. And so that's the whole thing about filmmaking, is it's show, not tell. And so just wrapping that all back into, that's really what medicine needs to be more of as well. Show people that they can heal rather than tell them that they'll heal.
Wow.
Yeah, it's exactly what happened with that gentleman whose story I was telling. Is he sort of found his way to his own story.
But you helped him find the way. And I think you probably saw it before he did, but you're really talented at this. So you didn't tell him right away. You kept asking the questions that helped him go down the path, even though you could see 10 steps down the path. So in some ways, like a healer really also needs to be like a very conscious parent, just helping us to all figure things out for ourselves.
Yep. Well, and it's storytelling too, as in your films.
Right.
You are letting the audience find their way to the story themselves.
You know, it's interesting too, because we're talking about placebo, nocebo, but also faith, belief, and insight, and how if you have belief, knowledge, and some healing tool, that's like exponentially more powerful than one of those by itself. So like a drug without belief is not as powerful. We know that because of placebo. And a drug with lack of belief is even less powerful. So you're making me think of this thing. Like when I was stuck on the floor in all the rage, I couldn't move. At one point, I was thinking about my sister, and I know she was worried about me. So I felt like I needed to call her, and I needed to text her and tell her I was okay. So I started to text. It was like a razor blade pain in my arm. And I was like, ow. So I took a breath and I was like, all right, what? That's so weird. And so I did it. And then I realized I had to stop and think. So I had knowledge at that point. I knew what was going on. So that was helpful, but I didn't know what was going on. Right. And so I didn't have a facilitator to help lead me. I had to do that, but I'd had the help of facilitation before, knowing about Dr. Sarno, having already healed in some ways. So I had to take a long breath, and I was like, oh, I'm telling her because I'm worried about her when I'm fucking stuck on the floor in terrible pain, and I'm overly concerned about how she feels instead of how I feel. That's messed up. So I took a breath and said, okay, now I just want to tell her for myself. No problem. I didn't have that razor blade pain, but it was really about, I was enraged about having to be concerned about her, even though I was the one on the floor. And once I was able to kind of reconnoiter, nothing was different, just how I framed it, or understood what part of me was enraged about that. I was able to then address it. I could have had another choice to say, she doesn't need to know. And she doesn't need to know right now. I can wait till later when I'm calmer or but at least I was better off in that way.
I loved your daughter's comment, Michael. Can you tell the audience what your daughter says about the pain?
Let someone else. You can let someone else be awesome for a while. Yeah,
I love that.
She didn't mean it though.
She became a star. Rose, you bump into that a lot with patients where they're stuck between pleasing somebody else and pleasing themselves, and it becomes negative self-talk. So they really start to nocebo themselves rather than figure out a way like placeboing themselves. Rose?
Well, I suppose it's a diagnostic tool when they get when there's the nocebo effect, because you know that it's about defiance and about pushing people away. So in that regard, it's an interesting insight. But what was called to mind, Tova, was when we did the film in Melbourne, a lady phoned me on her way home. She lives about 30 kilometres from Melbourne. And she phoned me and she said, I told my husband how mad I was with him, and my back pain left immediately while they were in the car.
Yeah.
Such a lovely, simple. I mean, I know it's much more complicated than that, but I just love that little bit of insight that she got in that moment of watching the movie. It was lovely.
It's not so complicated. I mean, I had a situation where I showed the movie here in Israel, and that was the time like when we were having trouble bringing the movie into, the computer. And this woman had headaches for years, and she had a headache in the movie, and the movie stopped. The computer stopped working. It was the most embarrassing moment of my career. And her headache went away just from half the movie stopping, Tova being embarrassed. Her headache's been gone. And so this is what Dr. Sarno said about remember, he even said 95% will get better and 5% will need therapy. I think it's the other way around, but
he expanded that over time. I think basically there was so much resistance to therapy. He's like, let's just do what you can and where you're at. And that's the other thing that's interesting is all of this stuff is completely cultural. It's not, I mean, there were ulcers, and then it became whiplash, and then it became back pain. I mean, there's acceptable ways. There are ways that are communicated. And when I say acceptable, it's like what the mind will accept as a pathway to fix the problem in the moment, to save you from your emotions.
Very good.
And it's both simple and not simple. And it's also going to shift over time. Here's the thing is, we're going to have a healing moment, and then it's going to come back. It's going to come back in some other way. And then we're going to heal some more, and we're going to, it's a disease of being human. And, I think it's important to remember that, because when it does come back, you don't want to feel panicked again. I mean, because anxiety or panic is only going to make it worse. It's really always about coming back into balance as much as you can.
Using the symptoms as your body's way of communicating to you that it's not happy about something, that there's a negative emotion lurking in there that you're not fully recognizing that needs to be addressed. And you can use your symptoms as a guide to searching for what that emotion might be and what's generating it. A lot of my patients, it's somebody who treated them badly when they were young is still active in their life. That's a fairly common phenomenon. They're not active in the same way as when you were a kid, obviously, but they can recreate echoes of what happened when you were a kid. That can be very stressing. And when people see that, then they need to confront the idea of setting some boundaries with that person that will keep them safe and healthy. And that's a challenge. And a lot of my patients don't feel capable of setting those boundaries until they have a better sense of their own value. As Michael was saying earlier, that he's got a general inclination toward concern about others who are close to him. Sometimes people need to learn to dial that back a little bit so that there's a better balance between concern for others and concern for yourself, being able to put yourself on the list of people you take care of. And when you can do that, then you can go back and set those boundaries a little more strongly, a little more firmly.
Yeah. I mean, it's
that's
interesting
the first line
too.
in therapy too.
Mm-hmm.
That's the first line, to have the patient understand that they've negated their own feelings for the feelings of others, and bring them back into their core body, so that they can see that every time they're feeling guilty about not following something up, that it's about feeling guilty, not about being cared about someone else. So, yeah, you're right.
That's a really good point. I love talking about, I'd like to talk about here in this book, she's a doctor, and this is her book. And she's talking the whole book about scientific. Her father was a doctor. She's a doctor. Have you heard of her, Dr. Clarke, Dave? You heard of her? Lisa Rankin?
I haven't read the book.
Yeah. I know you like to see facts. Well, anyway, she's quoting here Walter Cannon from Harvard, professor.
Physiologist.
Yeah. So anyway, I just like the idea, because this goes back to my first book, when it was, reading, Norman Cousins' Anatomy of an Illness, and understanding when he laughed, he secreted certain chemicals. And when he laughed more, he secreted more chemicals, and his SED rate went down or up, whichever way it has to go to get better, because he developed ankylosing spondylitis, and then it went away. And I even met someone recently, one of our patients' clients said, "Oh, that's not true. That didn't happen with Norman Cousins." And I'm like, no, that's my childhood. That was my first book, but enough about me. But anyway, so I'm interested in understanding the physiology of what goes on when we are laughing or smiling or think I'm going to get better. Rose, have you ever studied this when you were a nurse? Like, what things are happening in our immune system that are making the placebo work? 'Cause I believe I'm going to get better. So what's happening physiologically?
Well, I would think that it's a neuroscientist's spot, not mine.
Well, anyway, they said that. So it's also the fight. It's the same thing as the fight or flight response.
Right.
It's when
That's
it's
the two for sure.
Yeah.
Yeah, and there's also activation of the same receptors in the brain that are activated by opioids. So there's actual physiologic pain relief going on with placebos, and we certainly the fight or flight system is dialed down, and the tend and befriend and mend system is dialed up. And there's probably impacts on the immune system too. We know the neurologic system and the immune system are connected to each other from work that was initiated by a guy named Robert Ader, who was in University of Rochester, who discovered this connection. Nobody ever thought that the nervous system talked to the immune system before he found these discoveries, some fascinating studies that he did. So there's a lot of physiology behind this, much of which is not, fully worked out or understood yet. But it absolutely makes sense that if you're able to, and mindfulness meditation does this as well. It has, some of these same features to it, that there are physiologic benefits to all this.
It's interesting. There was, even in the course of us making our movie, it just made so much sense to me that anxiety clearly affects, and stress affects our immune system. We know that, right? I know I got MRSA when I had, we had just had a miscarriage, and I didn't realize it until years later. I was like, oh, that's the connection. I was like, where did that come from all of a sudden? And I thought maybe I got it from the hospital when we went there to deal with the miscarriage. But then I realized, oh, it was just I was not processing the grief enough, and I wasn't really dealing with that. But what has made me think is, I was looking into it, and I couldn't find any science or anybody writing about the limbic system being affected. All the data was that the limbic system ends at the thyroid gland. It ends at the neck. And then someone did this kind of dye transfer thing and found these microscopic lines that continued all over the entire course of the brain, that they had never seen this circulatory system that was connected to the limbic system. It was John Hopkins in like 2017 or 14, 15, something like that, found this. But before that, they said the brain and the limbic system aren't connected because we haven't proved it. We haven't figured it out, so they said it's not known, but now we know it. I mean, that's just one of those things about even belief kept us from even understanding that it could possibly be true. And I think that's what I would point is there's so much in science where we say, no, we can't say that's true. We can't believe that the mind and the body are interconnected because we haven't found the mechanism.
And the more we look, the more we find. I mean, we've got evidence now that people with, say, fibromyalgia, for example, their neuroanatomy is different than people who don't have it.
Right.
Yeah.
But we also understand that our neuroanatomy changes based on our life situation. So our neuroanatomy can also change. So this is where us sitting here understand that and discuss it, but now there's not enough studies tracking it to show it. So people will still say, well, then you're born that way, which is maybe also true that it's genetic because we hold in all this stress and we're more primed towards it. It's crazy. We pass that on in the genes. Yeah.
But there are genes effects as well, genetic effects, epigenetic effects, they're called, that can be passed on from generations. That, grandmothers who are under stress have more stress reactive grandchildren than people who were not, grandmothers who were not stressed. So it's the more that it's studied, the more that we find. The next question, of course, is can we do anything about that? If you were a victim of adverse childhood experiences, can we intervene in a way that will make a difference to you? And certainly in the form of these physical symptoms that are coming about from a mind-body cause, we absolutely can intervene. Right. I mean, that's
the
my whole
beauty
career
about it,
shows
that it can be healed, and people think it's hopeless, but it's not.
That goes to nocebo. When you're told you have an incurable disease, you give up any hope that you will find a cure.
Yeah.
That's one of the things, one of the concepts that of Sarno's that I disagree with. He talks about the symptom imperative as though those symptoms are always going to be coming back and that you are doomed to have something wrong with your body a large portion of the time for the rest of your life. And I haven't seen that to be the case. If you can trace the roots of this form of illness back to the source, help people learn how to recognize and express their emotions, then the symptoms become less and less over time.
I completely
not needed.
Right. I agree with you on one level, but the reason I think that is so important is if something comes back and you can kneecap that anxiety, fear response. So this is what would happen to a lot of his patients. he would help them with their back problem, but it would come back somewhere else. And if they didn't know, like he saw someone for a knee problem and then saw them like a couple of years later, they just had a rotator cuff surgery because they didn't make the connection that it had come back. And so, everybody's different. And I think it's really an important thing to discuss, not the symptom imperative as you're doomed to always be in pain or you're doomed to have terrible problems, but be aware that just because you've gotten through this thing, it may come back in some other way. And so that gives you increasing awareness so that you can nip it in the bud if it starts to happen again. And you don't go down that same regressive pathway of looking for some cure outside of yourself.
Yeah, and I think the better you get at that, the less of those, flare-ups in different parts of your body or flare-ups in the same part of your body,
Right.
the less often that'll happen.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Yeah.
And that's
why,
why
as Dr. Clarke said, what else is going on in your life? That's the first question you ask, really. Yeah. What else is happening in your life?
And that should be like a major part of training, because that's helping them to understand what connections they need to make. And if we're not making those connections, we're not doing medicine.
Exactly. Or therapy.
Well, we're not treating the whole person.
Yeah. But, even as human beings with one another, like if you think about grief, for example, people won't talk about the person who's died in case the person will get upset, in inverted commas. But in actual fact, the person wants to think about the person that they've lost and wants to think about their grief, for example, as Michael was saying about the loss of the pregnancy. I mean, it's important for people, for just ordinary people, to be caring for one another. And that's why I sort of come back to that cup of tea idea that, when you take your torch around at night and you check on the patients and they're awake and they're restless and they're worried, and you say, how do you like your tea? I'll bring you a cup of tea. And sometimes you come back and they're sound asleep, just from the healing words rather than from any treatment. Yeah. So as ordinary human beings for one another, it's important to just allow people to open up and to be attentive to what they've said rather than what we think about what they've said. Mm-hmm. Just being attentive and open, as Dr. Clarke was saying, just by talking to the person, asking them what else is going on. When did this happen to you? Was there any connection to that loss? Was there any connection to that argument? Was there any connection with your pain when it started? Things like that. Oh, yeah.
Yeah, it's surprising how often people won't tell you those things because they don't see a connection.
No, they don't. No.
A patient of mine was suffering abdominal pain for 8 or 9 months. She was also suffering domestic violence 2 or 3 times a week for 8 or 9 months. Exactly corresponding to each other chronologically. But she never mentioned it until she was asked about it.
Exactly. Well, you see, that, Dr. Clarke, is what we were talking about, the God business before with Tova. But in actual fact, when a person goes to the doctor, they actually go humbly, don't they? If you think of the word patient, it means person in pain in Latin. So the person in pain goes humbly to the doctor, or angrily or whatever, and expects the omnipotent doctor to come down and give them an answer. Whereas in actual fact, they're actually concentrating on their pain rather than concentrating on their whole lives and depending on someone with more skill or more expertise to heal them. Whereas, as Michael said, it's got to be within you first. You've got to have that insight to know that when you're going to the doctor, you're going to get something to help you internally, not omnipotently.
Yeah, well, you're right. I agree with you completely. And unfortunately, when we train physicians, we train them that symptoms come from 3 places: from organ diseases, from structural abnormalities, and from I don't know.
Wow. Well, I don't know. We just filled it. So if TMS is not studied, at least psychosomatic, which to me is interchangeable. it's being studied. Psychosomatic conditions. That's been studied.
Yeah, but so infrequently and so sparsely that the message that physicians get is that if it's labeled psychosomatic, then your need for further involvement has come to an end. You can't diagnose it. You can't treat it beyond giving somebody something just for the symptoms. And
So
it's
you broke
really,
the rules.
and it's,
You've been breaking rules for years.
and it's really not your job description. Your job is organ diseases and structural abnormalities, and the rest is, it's in somebody's head, and it's not your problem. That's the message.
And it's tragic, isn't it?
I tell the story to my medical audiences all the time of a patient who had abdominal pains and was evaluated by, other doctors, otherwise, perfectly fine doctors, but they never asked her about stress. She was the one with the domestic violence. And as soon as I asked her what else is going on in your life and found out that she was getting, slapped around 2 or 3 times a week, and that it corresponded exactly to the duration of her abdominal pains, that was the solution, but nobody else had asked her. And then I emailed the doctor who had done most of the diagnostic work and said, here's what we found out. We got her out of that relationship. And a couple of weeks later, all her pain was gone. And he writes me back and says, thank you for helping her. It's reassuring to know I didn't miss anything important. I just stared at my computer screen and just appalled.
I hope back. Actually, you did miss something important. You should, from now on, you should know that you should always ask them what's going on in their life, and that will give you a clue.
I was hoping he would say something like, gosh, I feel so bad for not having asked that simple question right on the very first visit.
Well, he obviously had never been taught that, so now you had to give him a teaching.
What's going on with you? Do you have some rage about this and some anger about this? You're lucky to live out there in beautiful country. I mean, really, and I know it's, look, what I wanted to bring up, I forgot, but I wanted to bring up something regarding,
let me jump in then while you think about it, because I just want to say it was interesting when you brought up the word patient, right, as someone in pain. But we also think of the word patient as somebody who's willing to wait. And so really, to be a good patient, you're meant to be a good repressor.
Yeah.
You're willing to forego your own needs. That's what patience is, foregoing your own needs. So it's really interesting how that dovetails together with this,
it does, doesn't it?
Problematic stuff. I mean, words are really powerful.
Yeah, one of my patients waited 79 years for the correct diagnosis.
All of your patients waited 79 years at this point. I mean, really, we all do, because we haven't really been dealing with this for eons. We kind of knew it when we just had barbers.
Did Freud ever talk about placebo? Who was the first doctor who talked about placebo?
Look, I think it's been since the Greek medical.
Yeah, that's my recollection as well.
Yeah.
Hippocrates.
Yeah.
Right. Like, the remember that.
Actually, yes. And the other guy, I can't think now, but it's been in the literature forever. Okay. But as Michael said, Descartes came along and said, I think, so therefore I am. So we all moved up to our heads. Yeah. But until the beginning of the 19th century, on death certificates, you could find what's the word for a broken heart, Dr. Clarke?
In Latin?
No, it used to be a diagnostic, a death certificate thing.
Yeah, there was a. It begins with a T. It was a Japanese doctor. I've forgotten the.
That's right. Yes.
His name.
Yeah.
I can look it up real quick. But yeah, it's people's hearts have fallen apart under extreme stress.
My grandfather choked to death in hospital from a bone because he was blind,
Wow.
And his wife, the grandmother, died within months, and she was perfectly healthy.
Mm-hmm.
Wow.
So,
Wow.
apparently on her death certificate, that was the death certificate.
Yeah.
Oh, wow. That's what made you think about it. So I remember what I wanted to say, and then I just forgot it again. Oh, yes. Yes. Remember about the rice and the water experiment? And then I did this lemon experiment with my daughter about cutting the lemon in half and talking to one lemon and talking to the other. And literally one lemon had mold and the other didn't. And I couldn't believe this, that a lemon had energy. I mean, I have a picture of it. It's all over my Facebook page. I send it to patients. And then the guy with the rice and the guy with the music and the crystals. That is absolutely what we're talking about. Positive self-talk. We're talking about it's placebo and nocebo. And one lemon was nocebo and one lemon is placebo. I can't make this up. Why isn't anybody talking to me?
Because you're talking, we're listening.
We're listening. That's what I was talking about before, being a good listener.
What do you think about this? I mean, I can talk to parts of my body and it won't flourish. I can talk to a plant, it won't flourish. That is the power of the mind. That is a chemical reaction. I am 100% behind placebo and nocebo, and I can't imagine that anybody would. You can't make these things up. Talk to me about the crystals, the water crystals, and the rice, and the mold on my lemon. And that Jesus healed, and Moses healed, and Jesus healed. How about the rabbis? I have stories after stories about rabbis that the people walked in a wheelchair and walked out walking. Stories, because this rabbi had power, and this man received. I mean, you can't make these things up. So we're talking for years.
Okay, could I just mention that I hate to bring us down to earth, but the rabbi probably asked him what else was going on in his life, just as Dr. Clarke does. Sorry to do that to you.
Yeah. And I found the reference at Takatsubo Cardiomyopathy.
Yes.
Which is a real mouthful, but also called stress cardiomyopathy, not related to poor circulation. It's just a weakening of the muscular portion of the heart under extreme stress. So just another example, and it's a well-documented phenomenon. It's another example of how stress can have physiologic effects.
Yeah, it's amazing, isn't it? Yeah.
I love that you coined stress illness now, and I know on your book you give exact things that are stress illness, but I feel, look, I've been a year now, besides my many years of practice, I watched my mother who had MS. She was like so healthy eating macrobiotics. It could easily be the food that was the gas in her nervous system and created a stronger myelin sheath because of the B vitamins that the myelin sheath is made out of. Or, people that healed from cancer and from MS because they had a purpose in life. They had a purpose. They were like, I want to walk. I mean, I can't make up our 52 shows.
Scientifically speaking, we have to be careful about, individual case reports. We don't know whether there was a natural fluctuation in the intensity of the illness in a particular person. We don't know whether the initial illness they had was partly stress related or largely stress related with a small component of a autoimmune disease in it. We know that adverse childhood experiences increase your risk of hospitalization from autoimmune diseases later in life. We haven't yet shown that intervening in a way that lessens the long-term impact of adverse childhood experiences can influence the course of these illnesses, but it's possible.
Right. When a doctor sees plaques on a spinal cord or a brain, it could mean MS, or it could mean they have plaques on their spinal cord and brain. And maybe they might have a symptom of MS, but it doesn't mean they can't heal and have plaques on their brain and still function like a person that doesn't have MS, because this is what I'm meeting. This is what I'm seeing. These are just regular people.
Yeah, no, I understand. I understand. It's very hard to tease out, what's going on there. These illnesses, these forms of illnesses do seem to fluctuate, in people who have them. Why are they fluctuating? Is it because of their emotions? Is it because of effects leading from their stress level to their immune system and then to the effects on their nervous system? Those details still remain to be worked out, and it's very challenging to design a study that would do that. But
autoimmune. The body attacks itself.
Right. And what influences it? What can we do to change that process? Will the kinds of interventions that we do in psychophysiologic disorders also have an effect on autoimmune diseases or on the long-term impact of ACEs, adverse childhood experiences? Still waiting to find that out. If we're going to ever convince mainstream medicine to begin to think about these ideas, we need to be as rigorously scientific as we can.
Yeah, but first we need to burn down Main Street.
Why do we have to be scientific? Why can't we just give people the insights and teach them how to help themselves?
Oh, that'll help the patients, a lot. I mean, I've seen that over the last, 38 years that I've been doing this. But if we're going to convince physicians, we have to have research studies that provide convincing evidence, and we're getting there. I mean, we've got over 200 references in our bibliography.
Yeah,
I think that it's not just the science. I think you're both right. I think it's the science and the action. So the more that we get physicians to start incorporating, I mean, it can't hurt to ask you what's going on in your life. It may slow down your meeting. You may have to spend a little more time with them. But as doctors start to see that their results improve because they're making more of an emotional connection with their patients rather than just writing in their clip. I mean, we all know this. Also, doctors are all told now, don't just look at your computer, make a connection with your patient. But it's one step further. Ask them a real story, what's going on in life. And if you know that, then you have more information. Just like you want to know, have you had this drug? Did you have this allergy? Did your parent have this? Did they have that? Do we want that information? There should just be that first question on what's going on in your life, just what comes to mind. And as they start to incorporate that, medicine will change over time itself. It's not just the science, it's also the action. And you don't need science to say, ask your patient how they're doing. That's science. That's bureaucracy. Like someone the other day was saying they were so incensed about changing a law to make someone do something when it was just such common sense, right? Like, oh no, it's actually my friend Caroline who, stopped by there when we were doing the yoga one. But she was she was in maternal health care in terms of like cervical cancer screening devices. But she was at this massive conference in Brazil where, I kid you not, the cesarean section rate in hospitals so not the social service ones, but the private hospitals was 90% scheduled cesareans, 90%. And the doctors knew this was not good. And they say, we need to pass legislation. And she just kind of rolled her eyes. And they said, oh, Caroline, you seem to have an opinion about this. And he said, yeah, well, you're the guys who make the decisions. You don't need to pass a law. You could just do the right thing and stop worrying about playing golf, or telling the women they don't need to have a cesarean section. And they all kind of laughed and said, yeah, you're right. But like they were still trying to put off the responsibility on somebody else. But I mean, it's an absurd rate. And in fact, the maternal health care is much better in Brazil in the non-private hospitals because they don't all have cesarean sections.
Yeah.
It's crazy.
Yeah, but I mean, it's also true that, even though it seems to take a little longer to ask these questions of patients in the short run, in the long run, it saves you time because the correct diagnosis is always going to be more cost effective than no diagnosis at all.
Right.
Yeah.
And we found that it improves job satisfaction for physicians. That this population of patients is very frustrating for them because they haven't had the training to know what to do. And imagine in any profession, if 40% of the problems that came through your door every day, you had no background in how to solve, you'd get pretty burned out pretty quickly over that. But once doctors learn that they can figure these things out and achieve good outcomes with this formerly frustrating group of patients, one doctor took me aside at a conference and said, this has put the joy back into my practice.
Wow.
I got to say, I think after this call, we should all start a petition, which is replace Dr. Phil with Dr. Dave.
Dr. Phil isn't on anymore. One of my patients.
Is that right? Oh, I could not watch that guy. He was just awful.
He's still on. He's got the highest rating.
Good television, but terrible therapy. I mean,
well,
he got the viewers.
Dave, why don't you have a show? Come on, you're like semi-retired. I know you're busy, and I know your wife is going to be angry at me, but why don't you have a show? And Rose and I will co-host with you, and Michael will come on once a month. Come on. The four of us, we was going for an hour and a half. We got you on. We got you on live. What do you think? You have a lot to offer.
Yeah, it's worth thinking about.
The Dave Clarke. Do you know I did my first seminar with Howard Scrivener? He is so heartfelt, so real. He's like, I'm never going to retire. I love to help people. Like he's very scientific, and he's like we're behind all these studies, but he is like the real thing. I couldn't believe.
And the rest of, and nobody else is. Is that what you're saying?
Like the people.
I think what she's saying is, let's get all these people together who have such heart and such knowledge and exponentialize what's going on.
And really make us think. Like the prince and his wife.
But they wouldn't be watched by the right people.
Yeah, we really make us think. We don't just go on Facebook Live. We really make us think, and kind of like you obviously take risk, Dave. You go out there and you make a statement, but you're not worried about getting told someone's not going to like you. Look at the way they treated Michael when he did his show. They treated him so when he did his movie. They were so insulting him about like the critics, and he came back, and he came back again, and he came back again.
I'm here, weaker than ever.
You have Rose. Go ahead, Rose.
I've lost my train of thought. I wanted to say, but it's not in Tova's in that conversation, that when you talk to medical professionals, healthcare professionals, or any of those people, their response to me is when I say to them, "Why don't you ask the patient what else is going on?" They say, "But I can't help them if they're going to tell me that their child is ill or that they're experiencing domestic violence. I'm too scared to ask them, and it'll take too long." So I thought, that's the divide that we need to conquer. That whole idea that.
So interesting.
Yeah, for any physicians that are watching, I mean, the technique that I use is if the patient wants to spend the next 2 hours telling me their life story, I honor that. I say, that's really great that you want to share this information. We don't have time for it today, but I want you to make a list of all the stresses that you've experienced in your life, both in the present time and in the past, and bring the list back when you come back for your follow-up visit after we've done your diagnostic tests, and we'll take a look at the list at that time. And it gets people thinking, they start writing stuff down.
Lovely.
Once they start writing, more things come, writing has a magic ability to pull ideas out of people's heads. It gets the doctor honorably out of the room and on to their next 15-minute appointment, if they're so lucky to have 15 minutes. Yeah. And then, but it gets the patient thinking about all these stresses in relation to their condition. And not infrequently, they will start finding solutions to bring the stress level down. And when they come back for their follow-up visit, they'll say, I'm starting to feel a little bit better.
Right.
Yeah, exactly.
I want to talk back to what you said, Rose, which was even if you do ask that question, the doctor may not have the solution, but simply asking that question is like, can I get you this tea? Can I make a space for you to just be present for yourself for a moment and even open that door? So I think that's what you can actually tell them back. Well, I wouldn't have anything to do. It's literally asking a question, like Dr. Clarke said, it opens the door. And maybe they have to come back. Yeah. And it's because if the door is closed, you're just going to keep on knocking,
Yeah. I think also that often, Dr. Clarke, you might expand on that. When you do medicine, for example, or any of those health related degrees, you actually have to be a person that only focuses. It's so intense. The training is so intense that you're in this funnel, and you've got to know every single thing about your particular disease, and that means that you can only concentrate on that space. And I think that that's a lot of the issues with medicine as well, and all the healthcare facilities. If, for example, if you're a chiropractor, you concentrate on your particular modality. If you're a GI surgeon, you concentrate on your modality. You don't concentrate on the fact that the person had ACEs and they're bringing that into the room with you. And unfortunately, that's the training, as you said in the beginning. The training is there's three components that you've got to look at. What were they? Genetic,
the gastro,
organic,
something.
And I don't know.
Organ disease.
Oh, the organs, the structures, and the I don't know.
Right.
Yes. Yes.
I want to put a pin in something. I got to jump in a second.
Before you talk, before the pin, hold the pin. Yes, I'm going to interrupt you.
Please do.
Okay, because I have an idea, and Rose and I, first of all, we're actually bringing This Might Hurt to Israel and to Australia, and then we're going to bring all the rage back to the 80 countries. We're working on the movies getting around. We got some projects going on, but here's a project. Hear me out. We make up a small ebook and we put on it. We know you've learned in medical school about organic and structural, and I don't know. Here are 10 things that we have proven you can do. We make a small ebook and we send them, we collect money. We have a campaign, we collect money and we send them to every doctor. And it be from, we put the TMS roundtable, we somehow promote ourselves so it's indirectly soft sell, but in a way that we help doctors. We give them an opportunity to even see.
It's already happening, I think, Tova.
How?
Well, that's what I was going to say. Is I think we're reaching a tipping point. That's the point I was making. Is that more and more, it's not so bifurcated. Most chiropractors will now say, "Yeah, I understand what's going. I have to deal with the emotional part. Otherwise, what my treatment isn't actually helping." Right? Then we're just stuck in this thing. Every time I talk to a physical therapist and talk about the movie, they're like, "Oh yeah, I totally know." And so I'm dealing with the whole pain body.
And many dentists, like, wait a minute, snoring. Right, spoke to, go ahead. I'm sorry.
So it's a tipping point. And so this knowledge is not, the systems at a certain point implode from the weight of their own incompetence or their own ability to adapt to what's going on. And it may not be an ugly revolution. It's just more of like, we're having a shift in thinking and awareness, and it's happening. But I also think what's really important, and this is a nod to the roundtable as well, and what you were saying is that something like this does bring in all these different people, which then helps them connect to each other, which helps other people connect these different ideas, which is another part of the tipping point. So it's not just one idea. I mean, like you were saying, there's so many people who are doing such great work, and they may not be, and they are working together a lot, but at a certain point, it just becomes the shared knowledge, and it's going to just shift. And I'm going to put a date at 2024. We're going to see a very different world.
Oh, wow.
What do you
I'm
think?
just trying to manifest it somehow.
Okay. Dr. Clarke, would you mind, as we wind up now, would you mind mentioning your organization?
Yes.
And where people can get information from?
Oh, sure.
Book. It's really an amazing organization. It's very user-friendly, the website. Quite interesting, the website.
Yeah, we're always growing things on there. But I just want to second what Michael said about reaching a tipping point. There's, more and more research. There's another documentary film in the works. So I think, and there's also the opioid epidemic that has afflicted a lot of particularly English-speaking countries that physicians realize now they can't just use opioids indiscriminately, and they've got to find a better alternative, and they're looking for one that's based on scientific evidence, and that's something we provide. So I think it was in Michael's film, the quote from Gandhi about first they ignore you, and then they laugh at you, and then they fight you, and then they agree with you and say that you were right all along. And I think we're moving along that pathway.
Yeah, we are.
But to answer Rose's question, ppdassociation.org is the website.
Is it also stressillness.com or no?
That's my own website for my original book called They Can't Find Anything Wrong, which is basically 4 dozen case histories. And then the one that Tova was showing is a textbook, but we deliberately removed all the jargon from it so that the medical types could read the mental health stuff and vice versa without getting lost and confused in terminology. So it turns out any sort of scientifically oriented reader, whether they're a healthcare professional or not, can read the book that Tova is holding. And I'm surprised, but a lot of therapists are now prescribing it.
Great.
Oh, it's a very, very good read. It's not an intimidating read at all. It's very, very good.
Wow. Well, I wondered about this placebo, nocebo when we started talking about it. And it's ended up, although we haven't had any questions as such, it's been a very interesting time. And thank you, Dr. Clarke, for joining us. And thank you, Michael, for always being there. It's just been lovely. And please join us again next week.
Yes, wonderful.
And we've got some amazing guests again coming along.
All month of April. And happy holidays to anyone who's celebrating. Hi. It's the little girl. No, it's the other little girl. One of the little girls in the movie. I don't remember.
Somebody was asking about the authors on the book, and it's the first 2 editors are Clarke and Schubiner on psychophysiologic disorders, and it's available pretty much only on Amazon.
Dave, I'd like to invite you back, maybe regularly, and maybe I'd like to I don't usually advertise the show to doctors' organizations. We have like 3 or 4 Facebook pages here, even in Israel, mental health professionals and doctors and, Anglos, all who've made Aliyah. And I just feel like maybe there'll be a special show we could do and invite other doctors to come and ask questions and make it for physicians who are interested in body, mind, and maybe create some shows around that.
Yeah, any healthcare professional who wants to bring joy to their practice.
Exactly.
As well as to their patients.
Hold on. You just hit on something. I think that's a title of a book or an article, Bring Joy to Your Practice. I'm serious, because sometimes it's just that concept. Bring joy to your practice. Yeah. Oh, hold on to that.
Okay, I will.
My idea about a small. How many doctors in America?
About almost a million.
Go, but go, Dave. I'm not done talking. Bye, Michael. How many doctors in America?
Almost a million.
A million. Okay, so if we did, I'm serious about this. Has anything been done like that, where we could educate doctors about the joy? That could be the title. Bring the joy back in your practice, and we could have, a story about what this doctor said to you. I'm just saying there's a lot we could do, and even if we touch some doctors, because they are the nucleus in many ways to the patient. Yeah, no, it's
something that I've been doing on a smaller scale since the late 1980s. I've spoken to physicians groups all over North America and Europe, and it's usually best in the context of a setting that they're already comfortable with, where they know that the speakers have been vetted for being evidence-based, a medical conference or what's called a grand rounds lecture at a hospital, residency environment, those kinds of settings. When you get onto the internet, there are tons and tons of questionable treatments out there. I'm just looking to see if I have my list up here. I keep a Word document on my lower screen every time I see a new scam designed to treat people with pain. And I've got a full page here of websites and various devices. The back bridge, the iron neck, the Normatec leg pulse. I mean, the cryo back. The list goes on, and that's what physicians are bombarded with, is these all kinds of things that have no evidence behind them and are just designed for the manufacturers to make money. And so you have to, distinguishing yourself from that swamp of snake oil, essentially, is a challenge.
Right. But I'm saying, rather than, look, you getting into these talking is you have to, like you said, you're evidence-based, and this is important. I'm talking about a pamphlet or a flyer or some kind of small book that can be, we raise money to educate doctors, because I think doctors are not opposed if you're not throwing it in their face.
Yeah. We do. We have a brochure. We've been struggling with the idea of, how do we, as a small organization, distribute that? Because it's a lot of work to, have them printed and shipped, and but we do have one that's called "Is Stress Making You Ill?"
Okay, so
and it's like a trifold brochure that people can have. I used to have one in my examination rooms, and it was a huge clinical clue when I would walk into the room and see the patient reading that brochure, that they had picked it out of the holder in the wall.
We're on to something. What do you think, Rose?
Dr. Clarke, the thing to point out also is in the healthcare industry, we're inundated with information that we have to pick up immediately. Like, we've got to know the problems with contraindications of drugs and things like that. So we've got to come up with that immediately. We've got to be on the ball with all those other things, and we're also inundated with information. And which information are we going to pick up quickly? So there are other opposing factors, or whatever you'd like to call it, within our desire or our need to know, evaluate, and see whether or not it helps the patient. So I know that, from a nursing perspective and a midwifery perspective, I've got to know every time I see a patient that I'm giving them the best clinical support or advice or whatever within the moment. And if you're a medical practitioner, it's even more incumbent on you to make sure that you do the right thing. So I think that's the opposing factor, isn't it? That which one do you take on board first?
Yeah, I mean, first you have to decide, is this good science, good medicine? Yeah. And then, is it something that I can, learn how to do? And to a certain extent, what we're asking of physicians, it's like asking a plumber to learn to be an electrician. It's a big jump in their training. If they've been taught to do organs and structures, for all these years, and now all of a sudden we're asking them to do psychology to a certain extent, it's a jump.
Good point. Very good point. Because I always say doctors do what they do well. They're not to be blamed. They do what they do well. Wow.
Yeah, and then they reach the that limit, and then one of the approaches that my organization recommends is called integrated care, where you have a behavioral health person right there working beside you in the same office that you can call into the exam room when you uncover these issues going on. And then you have the issue, you got to train the behavioral health person to be able to do this. And because most of them have not had this kind of training. Very few mental health professionals are comfortable with people whose main issue is a physical symptom. So we need to, it's a blind spot. Neither the medical nor the mental health professionals have had formal training in this. So we need to bridge the gap. It's mostly about teaching behavioral or mental health people who are working with doctors, how to be comfortable with people who have primarily a physical symptom. So it's quite a gap to bridge, but we are seeing it get bridged more and more and more. As Michael was pointing out, we are absolutely getting to a tipping point.
And the good thing is that everybody that heals from TMS, they want to be in this field. So it's a good thing, little by little.
Well, they're doing that in Halifax, aren't they? So, I mean,
yeah. It's surprising that it's not the prestigious academic medical centers in large cities that are adopting this. Where I'm seeing it is in Temple, Texas, Albany, New York, Halifax, Nova Scotia, Grand Junction, Colorado, some smaller communities in Europe, both medical schools in the country of Slovenia are doing this. So it's not Harvard and Stanford and Oxbridge and what's the big one in Israel?
Technion, not Technion.
Yeah, Technion or the big medical center, Hadassah. They aren't the ones that are doing this. It's places where it seems like the medical community is closer to the population, where they they know each other personally.
Yeah. Listen, we started out as medicine came from herbs, and we're going back to medicine coming from, you shaked your head when someone mentioned mushrooms, you shaked your head, the psychedelics. So, it could be that things were changing and we are making a difference. We're making a dent with, there's a story about the starfish throwing all the starfish back in the sea story about the little boy and the starfish, and he's throwing all the starfish back, and someone says to him, why just waste your time throwing the starfish? Or do you remember that little, I'll find it on Facebook. But
I do. Yeah. Well, it made a big difference to that starfish.
Yeah, exactly. Thank you for the punchline. Thank you so much, Dave. You're amazing. And now you know how to get on, because we're gonna talk again. And thrilled to have you really
thank you for doing this. As Michael said, every opportunity we have to network and to get the word out is essential. I spend a lot of time studying other social change movements, and that was a big part of their success. Essential to their success was how they networked. So what you're doing is very, very important.
Amazing.
Thanks.
I'm blessed. Rose,
all right. Well, thank you again, and we'll see you.
All the best.
Okay, on the internet.
Bye-bye.
Bye.